Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, your weekly source for encouraging and equipping local church leaders, with your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark sit down with church leaders that you should know. We believe these honest conversations will be helpful and encouraging to you as you lead the local church. Here is this week's episode.
Welcome to episode number 105 of the Church Leadership Podcast. We are so thrilled that you have joined us for today's episode. Some of you listening or watching have been with us since the beginning, and man, we sure do appreciate you, Church Leadership Podcast Nation. Some of you, maybe this is your first episode listening or watching. We are glad you are here. And we want you to know that our mission here at the Church Leadership Podcast is to encourage and equip you to lead in your local context. And so we know today's episode is going to do just that. So we're thankful you're here. I do want to encourage you, before we even get to our conversation today, to make sure that you go over and subscribe to our podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, you can subscribe any number of ways on your listening app. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, you can hit the subscribe button, hit that bell, so you'll be notified every time a new episode airs. And we're just glad that you're a part of this podcast. And it's our hope and desire that every episode encourages you in a real way. So here is today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Podcast. Mark and I are so glad to include you in our conversation this week on episode 105. We're going to be talking about some things that affect us all right now. And I believe what we're going to talk about today will be helpful, encouraging, and even challenging. So we are glad that you are joining us on the Church Leadership Podcast. Mark, thanks for having me back on the podcast this week. I appreciate that.
Listen, this is like old school, man. This is Church Leadership Podcast on the road. I'm not on the road. Andy's on the road, joining us from a hotel room. But, you know, used to, when the Church Leadership Podcast first launched way back in 2019.
Been 2 years, yep.
Yeah, it was on the road all the time. We would go on the road and interview people. We were in the same room, and a little different these days. And we're going to talk a little about different.
We learned to adapt and overcome here at the Church Leadership Podcast.
We did.
In other words, we just go with the flow. Whatever God gives us, that's just, we are blessed to be able to do this. So whether it's in a hotel room, sitting in the same room with each other, or whatever, we're just glad to get to do it.
We are flexible. Yes, we are thrilled and glad. Mm-hmm. Some people say things like it is what it is. You know, kind of hate that.
Yeah.
So what I say is sometimes it bees that way, and we just go with the flow. That's just what we do.
That's it. Speaking of going with the flow, our flow has been interrupted this last year, Mark.
Yes, it has. Major.
And I think it's kind of hard to go with the flow when you don't know where the flow's headed.
Yep.
Yo.
That's right. And I know, I mean, those watching and listening, I know we're in this together. We've had conversation after conversation. I mean, if you have survived in ministry up till this point, I don't know how to give you a gold star, but I would give you a gold star, because just surviving at this point is amazing, and you should be commended for it. So let us say that up front. This has been difficult, and I feel like I'm pretty flexible, but I'll be honest, when I got COVID in December, flexibility went out the window. I'm ready for this to be over with. So yeah, we everything's been turned upside down, and still is being turned upside down.
Yeah, whoever's been praying for patience for Mark and me, I don't know whether to thank you or high five you in the face really hard. So yeah, I had a conversation with a church member this morning 1 year ago, literally 1 year ago on this Sunday in 2020. He and I were talking about how the church in America needs a wake-up call, how we are too comfortable and complacent, and throughout history some events have happened and the church has risen to the occasion. You know, think about like the Great Depression. That's the specific example that we were discussing last year. The church basically needs another opportunity like the Great Depression, and well, here we are.
We got it. Yes, we did. And you know, when this episode airs, it's literally going to be a year since everything shut down. And it's kind of ironic that we're getting to do this episode the week that happened, that anniversary. And in fact, in my church, we were talking about that, and we were talking about survival versus thriving. And I said, we've survived this last year, but we've also thrived. And I got my church just to do something because I was curious, quite honestly. And it happened so fast you can't keep up, even as a pastor and as a leader. And so I just asked the church, I said, listen, if you weren't here as a regular part of our church a year ago, just wave your hand. Half the church waved their hand. And
Wow.
it's just crazy. It's insane that God has blessed us. We thrive. But here's what I would tell you. We are well aware that not everybody has experienced that. But it's good and bad, right? That means that our church has drastically changed in a year. And there's still people that are worshiping with us online that still haven't come back to campus. And that's the hard part of it. And I know a lot of you have struggled, and your church has struggled. And so we're with you in that struggle. Okay. God has blessed our churches, but we have experienced some of those same struggles with you. And we want to give you some encouragement today. Really, our goal every single episode is to encourage you. And so Andy and I were having a conversation before we hit record, and we're just going to continue that conversation if you let us. And hopefully you'll join that conversation. But we're just talking about what a pivotal time we're leading in right now as pastors, as leaders. If you're a volunteer at your church, you are volunteering and leading at a critical time in the life of our church, because as we record this, a lot of us are getting ready to somewhat open back up in a sense. The vaccine is more and more available. Herd immunity is coming, hopefully later this summer or later this spring. And people are kind of itching to get back to church. When I say get back to church, I mean in-person worship. And so there's some opportunities here, great opportunities, but there's also some opportunities to fall into some traps, and we want to help you avoid those as well.
Yeah, what Mark was talking about as far as be careful not to let what is currently happening discourage you, because you got to think big picture. We've heard all of the projected statistics about the percentages of people who are back in worship right now. I mean, if you're running 50-60%, you're probably knocking it out of the park.
Yeah.
Right now, if you got 50 or 60% of your people who have returned in person regularly worshiping with you, that's fantastic. If not, listen, don't stress. Don't think the end is here and you're just going to have to give up, because we're hearing those doomsday statistics about 20% of people who haven't come back to church won't. And it's not that they're not going to come back to your church, they're just not going to come back to church. But let me tell you something encouraging, something that I've been reading, and that is people are eager to get back to church. Of the people who haven't been coming to your church, maybe some people who might be immunocompromised or at risk or have other reasons why they haven't been worshiping, I am confident and I'm encouraged to know that a lot of those people will be returning, like Mark's talking about, the vaccine and immunity and just the overall awareness in our society that things are getting better. I think people are going to come back to our churches. And I think we need to be ready for that. I think we need to not wait on that to happen, but we need to be a little bit proactive and plan for that. And I think that's what Mark and I are talking about in this episode right now is we can learn from what we've experienced, but also we can try our best to consider and to pray and to plan according to the Spirit's leadership of what we think might happen in our church, in our community, in our context.
Absolutely. I think, we talked a lot this last year about the opportunity God has given us with COVID, not to look at it just as a challenge, but as an opportunity, because God was opening new opportunities. And we're going to say the same thing to you right here, right now. This is not the typical Easter opportunity coming up next month. It's not the typical, high attendance Sunday opportunity. So what I would say is everything you've known and learned about the way we reach people for Christ, you probably need to throw that out the window as far as church is concerned and keep it thrown out. Don't feel like just because, people are getting ready to come back, which I agree with Andy 100%. We are on the same page with that. We think they're coming back. You hear some other people say that, they won't, and online's going to be the key. Online's going to be here to stay, but people are itching to come back into a community of faith. It is real, and they will be coming back somewhere. And so we want that to be in your church. And
Yeah, and you mentioned Easter, Mark. We've got Easter just around the corner. I think we're going to have people who are going to show up at our churches who are excited and anticipating a great time of gathering and worshiping a risen Savior. Because you know what? We didn't get to do that last year.
that's right.
And if you have a small crowd or if you have a record-breaking crowd, I say enjoy whoever comes to gather with you and your church family and just, I mean, raise the roof, rock the
Yes.
place where the community knows Jesus is alive just simply because of the people who are gathered there. We're going to celebrate. I mean, we're going to party like it's 1999 or something at our church. So, I mean,
Right. That's right. We're going to party like it's 2021. No,
there you go. Yeah.
absolutely. I agree. I think in saying that, here's what I again, just what Andy said. I don't want you to get discouraged if you don't have whatever. If your church runs 100 normally and you don't have 100 there, don't get discouraged. If your church runs 1,000 and you have 500 there, don't get discouraged. Okay. Here's what I want you to do though. I want you to begin thinking and praying about how to seize the opportunity that God has placed before us. Again, do not neglect, do not forget that online presence. In fact, today, just before we recorded this episode, I was on my computer preparing a Facebook ad for our church. We haven't done a lot of Facebook ads in COVID, and all of them that we have done were geared toward online worship. But we're doing a Facebook ad for in-person worship on Easter Sunday because I want people to know it's a big deal. I mean, the fact that we worship a Savior who was killed for our sins, but then he beat death and sin by rising again, that's a big deal. And we should be celebrating that in a big way. So we don't want you to get the cart before the horse. So if your city still has a lockdown and all that kind of thing, we don't want you to go crazy or anything. And depending on where you live, the mask ordinance may or may not still be in effect when Easter comes. But be safe. I think people are going to be attracted to a community that is taking their health and safety and valuing that in a big way. I think
that's key, Mark.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
that's key. I was just saying, is whatever your community and your context, that should be your plan based on that, not based on what the church across town is doing or across the country is doing. Don't compare your church to another church of different size, of different demographics, of different context. Listen, you need to sit down with your leaders and prayerfully consider what's going to be best for your church. And it may be a hybrid service for Easter. It may be plans for weeks or months out from this point to decide how you're going to transition and change. But the bottom line is a plan is key. I mean, to think about that, to consider a proactive approach, not a reactive approach to Easter and beyond, I think is crucial right now. I think a lot of people are just stopped in their tracks because of fear. They don't know which end of the thing to grab or what to do with their hands. I mean, it's just like, we don't know what to do. So a lot of people don't do anything. And I don't know that that's the best approach right now. I know it's always appropriate to be still and know God is God and to wait on him patiently. But when there are opportunities to act, I think we should, and we need to carefully and prayerfully consider how we are to act. And planning for Easter is one of those things. I mean, it's coming. We're going to a lot of us are going to get together in person. And I think we should really consider how we can make that a special time.
Absolutely. And you think back, Andy and I have talked a lot about this. You think back on the last year, and if you are one of these people like us that observe trends and kind of the way leadership goes and church trends, what we have noticed and observed is that churches that the leaders, the pastors, the leaders exhibited strong leadership in stepping up when others were waiting, others were kind of observing what was happening, kind of what Andy's talking about being reactive. But those leaders who were proactive and were intentional in leading out to take care of the health of their churches, to make clear distinctions and decisions one way or the other, those are the churches that have thrived during this time. Those are the churches that have not missed a beat financially. And because people need, in times of crisis, they need strong leaders. They need strong leadership. They need to know that their leader has some kind of plan and a mission and is leading them somewhere. And so what I'm telling you is, and what we're talking about is, because we're coming out of COVID, I don't know how long that's going to take. It could take months and months and months, but we're coming out of it. It doesn't mean business as usual. This is still a crisis because people still don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They don't know when it's safe. They don't know how they should do it. They don't know, how the gathering is going to look. I mean, it's like everybody's coming to church again for the first time, it seems like, because everything's different now, right? I've told our people, the ones that are worshiping at home, look, when you come back, it's like you're going to be visiting the church, not because your church is not your church, but because everything's different. But it's a good thing because God's working. And so we need to, in light of all that, we've got to be intentionally leading our people. We got to be clear about where God's leading us as churches and as people, so that people will feel comfortable, and they may be scared to death. They may not know what to expect, but they'll see your strong leadership and they'll say, you know what? I'm with them. I can be a part of this community because this community is doing something.
Yeah, and I think the only way that's going to happen, Mark, organizationally as a church, is if people individually are taking the right steps in their own life to make sure they're emotionally, spiritually, and physically
Yes.
healthy. And I've often said, and I've heard it said, and I don't even remember who I heard it from the first time, but we take on this victimized mentality when things like this happen, and we ask the question, which is the wrong question: why me? Why this? Why now? Instead of why? Ultimately, the why question has been answered, and that is, everything happens for God's glory.
That's right.
So in our own lives, if we have that big picture understanding that this is happening for God's glory, then the why me, why this, why now, and why our church, and that would transition into more of a victor
Yeah.
mentality rather than a victim mentality. And you start asking the right questions, like, okay, instead of why this, then the question probably better is, what now?
Mm.
In my own life, in our church, what can we do now that this has happened? We can't control the fact that it has or hasn't gone the way we want it to, but we can do our best to prayerfully consider, all right, from this point forward, how can we follow the leadership of the head of the church, Jesus? How can we stay in step with the Spirit? How can we do things biblically yet honor the safety of our people and the community that we're in? I think that's important
Yes.
individually. And just like we have to be very careful not to go back to the way things were before COVID. Listen, one of our biggest temptations is to programize our church and fill up our calendar so that we think all of this busyness in the life of our church equals health. And that's not the case. And individually, that's what we have to be careful about too. As
Right.
leaders in the church, we have to be careful not to over program and over schedule our lives and overwhelm ourselves with too much to do. We need some margin, might be a good word to
That's
use.
exactly right. And look, if you remember, just think back. I know you'll remember. Think back to beginning of the pandemic last year, last March, last April. What did you say? What did leaders over and over say? We heard leaders say over and over, you know what? This has been a blessing because I've had time with my family that I haven't had
Amen.
before. We've said that. Do not forget that. Look, it's a busy time. I mean, it's busy right now. You may be, having to preach your sermon online and on campus, and then, doing Facebook Live videos, 2, 3 days a week. I'm not sure what your schedule looks like. I hope you're not doing that, but you may be. And so you may already be in overwhelm now. But don't let this season that's coming up with reopening and Easter and all this stuff, which is a huge opportunity, do not let yourself become overwhelmed again. Remember what you said. Remember the joy of simplicity and that margin that Andy was talking about. Remember it and stick to it. Be disciplined. That means you're going to have to surround yourself with people who can do things, maybe not the same way you do them, maybe not exactly what you would want, but can do them well to the glory of God, so that you can have that margin and that time, like Andy said, especially time with your family and your time with the Lord. Do not neglect that.
Yeah, there's no way you're going to be able to lead your church or your organization well if you are over programming and putting too much stuff on the calendar. Because if everything's a priority and everything's important and everything has to get scheduled, then nothing's going to be important. And it's
That's
the
right.
same
Didn't
way in your
Syndrome
own
say
life.
if everyone's super, no one is, right? That's the same thing, right?
Well, I believe you're right. So
Go ahead.
but in our own personal lives, I mean, listen, if we're going to try to go back to the way things were and just fill our lives up with busyness,
Mm.
then we're going to be leading our churches by example and leading our churches as a leader to do the same thing. So be very, very careful. Guard your time. Take care of yourself spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And I guarantee you this: what will happen this Easter, what will happen this summer, what will happen this fall, God will honor and bless. Whether you have half capacity or 110% of your people coming back and then some, I mean, we just need to really understand this is a great time for us to learn and absorb what the Lord is trying to teach us and take advantage of the opportunities personally to grow and to see some amazing things happen, but also in our churches. There's so many opportunities. Mark and I have said this over and over and over again. We've even talked specifically about what kind of gift COVID has been in some ways for our churches. And individually for us and our families, as Mark mentioned earlier, one of the gifts for us is to kind of take back our calendars and take back some of that time for ourselves and for our families.
That's right. And again, church will always be there. Ministry will always be there. Your family may always be there for you, but the time you have with your family right now will not always be there. So take advantage of it. It's a good reminder.
I had a
Listen,
seasoned pastor tell me one time, Mark, he said, you know what? If things aren't right in ministry, you can always take a break from ministry. He said, if that's the case, he said, God can bless you to find another church. He said, but if things aren't right at home, you can't just go find another family.
No.
So you need to understand how important it is to balance your life and your family with ministry and see what those priorities really are, especially right now.
Yep. I mean, if you're going and finding a new family, that's a whole nother problem we got to talk to you about. But
that's exactly right. Yep.
So speaking of talking to you, here's what I want to suggest. Look, if you need help, okay, part of what this podcast is about is the reason, in fact, we started this to begin with over 2 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe. But the reason we started this podcast was we want to help pastors and leaders in practical ways. And so if you need help in thinking proactively and how to intentionally lead your church, if you need help in finding ways to reach people this Easter, if you need help in trying to find margin in your life, we want to help. Okay. Believe me, we want to help. And we're not in this for the money. Okay. We don't make a dime from the Church Leadership Podcast. We just want to help and pour life into you and to encourage you any way we can. So if we can help any way, then we'll just contact us. You can contact both of us at contact@churchleadershippodcast.com. We try to make it easy as possible. Contact@churchleadershippodcast.com. Andy and I both will get an email when you send an email to that, and we will certainly follow up, and we can help. We will help any way we can.
Yeah, and if you need to borrow money, I can give you Mark's personal email address, and you can contact him there, okay?
That's right. That's right.
So,
I only charge 20% interest, so we're good. Yeah. Well, listen.
Hey, you go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say I've enjoyed this
jumped the gun,
conversation.
took your line. Yeah.
No, I've enjoyed it. Even though we can't be in the same room right now, Andy, it's fun. And I don't know. I hope you feel the same way we do, but every time that we get to do this, I'm encouraged and it just breathes life into me. And so I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I have enjoyed it. Thank you so much to those who are continuing to listen and to watch. Listen, if you are watching, let me encourage you to hop on YouTube and to subscribe and click that little bell so that every time that we update a video on our channel, that you will be notified. So we want to be able to get the best information out there to as many people as possible, and we want you to be able to help us do that. So thank you to everybody who listens and watches faithfully. And we hope this week that you have been encouraged and equipped to intentionally and proactively lead in the local church for Easter and for the months and years to come.
That's right. We'll see you next time.